don't fall. That's when you know you're gonna go dry. Till the rain don't fall. That's when you know you're gonna go dry. And it won't do no good to be crying out loud, babe, or cursing the sky.
Welcome to Thinking Green. This show is being taped, so unfortunately you won't have a chance to call questions in, but hopefully there will be, when we post it on YouTube, there will be places that you can contact info that you can get answers to any questions. So my guest today is Nicole Cruz-Glacken, and she is running for mayor of Ledyard as a write-in candidate. And she's been talking to the Green Party for over a year, I think, but sometimes circumstances, as we've learned in New London as well, force people into the write-in option. But welcome, Nicole.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me. I appreciate the opportunity.
Well, the first thing I wanted to ask you is like what your background is, what kind of things you've been involved in Ledyard, both in a general way and also in their political world.
Mm-hmm. Well, originally, my husband and I are from Long Island. We found ourselves in Ledyard due to his military service. About 3 years ago, I really started getting active in the community. It started off with a protest about our food pantry and residents being denied access to social services. And from there, I got into contact with the Ledyard DTC. And with them, I ended up running as a candidate for town council. I did not win a seat. However, I feel like I made a lot of progress with the DTC, and I've really been working for, and I believe advocating for, the members of the residents of Ledyard. So, yeah, I've just been, having my ear to the streets and listening for the people and showing up where and when I can as best as I can.
Now, why mayor this year?
Why mayor? Well, I've had personal experiences with the mayor himself, and unfortunately, there is no other candidate for mayor this year, as there was not, at least from the DTC 4 years ago as well. And I think it's unfortunate that the people of Ledyard consistently have seemed to have just one option. And given my experience in the town and the work that I've done and the connections that I've made with people, I thought that they deserved to at least see someone try.
And I'm thinking that having a second candidate in the race also forces discussion of issues that just doesn't happen in an unopposed contest at all.
Right. Well, even when you're really active, there's only so far that social media goes, or there's only so many doors that you can knock. And I feel like this really puts the issues on a broader platform, even to the extent that hopefully it makes the sitting mayor answer for some things.
Well, I don't know a whole lot about Ledyard, so I went on the town of Ledyard's website this morning, and I looked at the mayor's office. The little blurb about what the mayor's office does says, and I quote, "The mayor's office exists as to efficiently serve and fulfill the requirements of the community for the residents of the town of Ledyard by ensuring a safe and pleasant community in which to live, learn, and develop."
Mm-hmm.
And I'm guessing, since you are running, you might have some thoughts on that.
Oh, I do. Well, they say that Ledyard is a town for all seasons. However, it doesn't seem to be a town for all people. And that's really where the issues come into play for me. Maybe 2 years ago, I wanted to be on the Youth and Social Services Board. I was denied by the mayor because he said there were more highly qualified candidates. And some of those candidates clearly happen to be very close with the mayor already. One of them happened to put my picture on social media and called me a cop hater. I brought these issues directly to the Youth and Social Services Board, and one of the things that the mayor had to say about it, not an apology or any empathy, was that I slightly misquoted him when I spoke at a meeting. So I would say that that's not true for all of us. At this particular meeting, there was also a resident who barged into the meeting. My husband and my children were there, and she ended up sticking her finger in my face, yelling at me about how I was raising my children, because a member of that board was clearly seen texting under the table during the commission of a meeting, and Mayor Fred Allen was sitting right there, and he said nothing. So I don't believe that to be entirely true. I was just at town hall looking for information to run as a write-in candidate, and I was given false information from the registrar's office. So that's an issue, and I know other people have had that particular issue as well. And that really is a roadblock to people who are trying to be active within the community, whether they're trying to educate themselves or possibly run for offices themselves. And I just feel like that cannot be.
Now, what is the political landscape of Ledyard in terms of, well, the parties represented? You know, New London is kind of a Democratic monopoly city. Mm-hmm. There is a Republican Party, there is a Green Party, mm-hmm. but we are both very small compared to the Democrats mm-hmm. who hold currently all 15 of our 15 possible elected positions. Mm-hmm. But what does Ledyard look like demographically mm-hmm. and party representation-wise? Mm-hmm.
Well, I think for some people, they believe that Ledyard is hopelessly red, and I don't have an issue with anybody depending on, you know, what their political affiliation is, but it seems more to be, like you were saying, it's there's a Republican stronghold, and that stronghold seems to be within small circles throughout town. So we have the mayor's office and we have the Board of Education, where we recently gained one more seat, as well as town council. And sometimes it seems like two wings on the same bird. So someone like myself, I ended up leaving the DTC because I felt like I really didn't belong there completely. And, you know, in terms of the demographics, Ledyard is also a predominantly white community. So I feel like the issues that people like myself, not just of color, but, you know, who don't have a history of generational wealth or having their own fathers be mayors, are really fighting to be heard and to be seen, and want people to know that we have something to offer as well. So, but if we're not given the grace to operate within those spaces, then I have no issue with continuing to chip at the wall.
It sounds as though, even though it's, you know, the party breakdown is quite different from New London, it's, you know, something that Ledyard and New London have in common, and probably with many towns all over the state, that, you know, there's kind of a legacy political establishment.
Yes.
And it's very hard for people to break into that unless they're kind of enabling the perpetuation of the system, even if they come from a different demographic.
Right, right. And having that experience personally, I have been called radical and rogue. I've even been called a terrorist. So while we talk about people feeling safe within the community of Ledyard, this in particular was a major issue for myself and my family when the on the RTC page, there was someone who was allowed to call me a terrorist over and over and over again. And considering that Mayor Allen is a Republican, he belongs to the RTC, I highly doubt that he said to anyone, this is not safe, this is not what our community represents. And so for me, there's a difference between what you say and what you do. And it's not my desire to be a part of some sort of legacy, you know, although
Right.
someone like myself is just now creating my own family legacy because I don't have that background. It's really just about creating an environment that is inclusive, because diversity of thought it's priceless. And when you have the same people sitting in the same rooms discussing the same issues, you come up with the same solutions, which really aren't solutions. In my experience, I feel like there tends to be two groups of people. There are people who are scared, and there are people who cause fear.
Now, the fact that you were accused of being a cop hater, that has happened locally to some of our New London Greens, because we have taken a stand over many years that the police department gets funded to a great extent. I think it's, I don't know, maybe it's the highest funded department, I believe. I think their budget's about $13 million a year. And when we have taken public stands that, you know, a lot of, I think a nonpartisan task force came up with the statistic that like 40% of 911 calls in our city are related to mental health disasters, you know, and crises rather than really a policing issue. And due to recommending that some funds from policing be moved to proactive dealing with people's housing insecurity, mental health issues, all the other things that might create turmoil in their life. We were also kind of labeled as being anti-cop.
Right, and I think it's an easy out, and I don't want to shy away from what I believe in and what I feel like the people need. And I myself have had to call Ledyard PD to do a wellness check on someone, although I would have loved to be able to call someone else. I have my own history with mental health struggles that I've been, I think, very honest about, as well as addiction to alcohol. I've been sober for 5 years, and I know that police are not the ones who should be dealing with those issues. And when we talk about the amount of money that is poured into our police department, of course, that money could be allocated to other places to better serve the people. In particular, when I live across the street from a situation where some pretty racist things have been said by construction workers, and the last interaction I had with an officer from Ledyard Police Department, I made him aware about a comment that was made about particular youth who happened to be black, and his response to me was, that was unfortunate. And it was vulgar. It was disturbing the peace. It had been disturbing the peace at my home for quite some time. And so the question I would pose is, what are we paying for when police officers show up and that is their reaction? We have issues at our senior housing authority right now, and when a resident of senior housing was interacting with a police officer while standing there, they heard their name coming over dispatch saying that they had just left the property. So are we paying our police officers to surveil seniors, or to let someone like me know that there was only so much they could do in the moment because that day had started their weekend? Or are we paying to be served by the people who are supposed to protect us?
And who we're paying, but yeah, it's an unfortunate situation, and it's unfortunate to hear that it's I think in many communities, I know that we're recommending here that we get police officers who walk and bike in the community much more than just driving in cars, which every year seem to be increasingly threatening looking automobiles.
Right.
That it just creates a divide that really inhibits how they can do their jobs because they're separated from the community.
Absolutely, and what I've been saying for years also is that it doesn't make the officers' jobs easier either. When people are so fearful of police officers, you increase the likelihood that there is going to be a negative interaction. So, there are many people who want to support police in theory, with thin blue lines or, back the blue. But what are you really doing to make their jobs safer? Well, police officers' jobs will be safer if people are healthier. That means physically, that means mentally, that means, socioeconomically, all of those things that are really the kitchen table issues for people that policing in and of itself has nothing to do with.
So other than wanting to, change the focus of spending, I guess, towards proactively meeting people's needs and less for the kind of policing that is confrontational. What are the other issues of your campaign?
Well, in terms of money, there has been a lot of fogginess surrounding certain situations or questions that people pose that they don't get complete answers to. In particular, we've asked, when donations are sent to the town, where do they go? What account do they go into? When they're moved out of that account, who approves it? Is there an approval, or, does someone just decide where they're going to allocate money that people send into the town? I really also want to acknowledge the fact that it's a first for someone who looks like me to even attempt to do something like this. And I don't want to misquote who the person was, but it was a recent political activity, and this was a first-generation Asian American saying that their parent had ran for something that they knew they had no chance at. But they could, because this was America. And that person ended up becoming pretty successful in the political arena. So when I think about people who look like me, particularly in the town of Ledyard, who do they look to say, I can do that, right? Because I know that as a fact, as growing up as a mixed, black girl and black Puerto Rican and Irish, it is absolutely a truth that you are more likely to believe in yourself and the things that you can do if you see the people around you who look like you doing those same things. And it makes me also think of housing. One, do people want to live in Ledyard who look like me? And two, outside of race, people are struggling to stay in Ledyard. 2 years ago, when I knocked the doors of Ledyard, that was really a main issue for most people. The taxes and affordability and the lack of affordable housing. So when you hear stories from seniors who have lived in Ledyard, raised their children there, have even served in different capacities as teachers, as volunteers, they had met the end of their road because they could no longer afford to live there, which meant that their adult children couldn't come back home to maybe settle for a little bit and save money because mom and dad are no longer there, and they definitely can't do it as young adults. So I would really like to see more affordable housing. At this point, I believe we are not reaching the threshold of 10%. I believe it's something like 4.6. And to me, I see no shortage of, mini mansions still being put up. So I don't see why we can't have small communities that are not disruptive to the rest of the town that look like, just, small homes in a cul-de-sac kind of environment where children can play and, people of different backgrounds can live amongst each other, so we can also start to break those barriers that we can often be fearful of one another based off of what we look like, because it's the money isn't trickling down. The Allen name is not unknown throughout Ledyard, and if anybody wanted to look up the amount of real estate that the family itself has in Ledyard, I can't help but wonder myself what the true intentions are, right? Because when you feel like something belongs to you and you don't want to share it with other people, are you really there to serve the people, or are you there to serve your own personal interests?
And housing is a tricky topic right now, because I think I read just a day or two ago that like 17, I don't know if it's nationwide or statewide, that like 17% of our housing now is owned by like equity companies. It's been turned into a commodity, and the trend is for more and more of that to happen. So, so I am curious about this, because the state of Connecticut did, through the support of Desegregate Connecticut, did pass some legislation to help make housing more affordable. But sometimes what they say is affordable isn't really,
Right.
I was, pretty impoverished. My kids are now 50 years old, but like 40 years ago or 45 years ago, when they were in school, we were pretty poor, and we rented a house that was not officially designated affordable, but it was a winterized beach cottage in Waterford, and the rent was cheap because it was a really cheaply made house, but it was fine. It was in a good neighborhood. It was, our own place. And now it seems that, whenever they would build so-called affordable housing, it was actually more expensive than what we were, what we had found on the marketplace. But the owner of the house, the landlord, hadn't spent much. He wasn't looking to make a killing. He was building equity, but he wasn't, trying to make shareholders happy or anything like that. And, he had a summer house just down the block, so we had bought into the neighborhood. So it seems like we don't see as many of living situations like that as an option anymore.
Right. And affordable housing, even though that has turned into what looks, I think, more like luxury housing, on the flip side of that, affordable housing shouldn't be inadequate housing, right? I think sometimes that's the idea that people have in their minds, dilapidated houses, and whether you have the need to live in affordable housing or not, you should still be able to live in a safe home. Your water should be hot and cold when you want it to be.
Sure.
You should be able to live in a safe community. As you were saying, when I grew up in a one-bedroom apartment with my parents. Technically, we were poor.
Yeah.
And, I was just looking at the poverty levels and having a conversation this morning about, it's not just about who's below the poverty level, who's at the poverty level, or who is just above the poverty level. There are families, working families, whether there's one parent or two parents or whatever that family looks like, right? Because all families look different, that are maybe not poor per the poverty line, but they're still struggling to make ends meet.
Sure.
A lot of us are closer to being one paycheck away from poverty than to becoming, someone who benefits from generational wealth, that takes years and generations in order to build something like that. And there's still people today, like myself, who are just starting that for their own families. And I believe that eventually you know, Ledyard is going to become a place where only the rich people can live if we don't get a hold of this.
The issue of absence of generational wealth is, it's actually a really big deal in New London because we have a very large proportion of our population that doesn't have generational wealth, and yet a lot of the development decisions or goals seem to be, let's just bring more wealthy white men in and build luxury apartments for them to live in.
Right.
And I'm not against building the luxury apartments, and white men are part of the diversity of the city as well, but there are old houses that there aren't funds available to renovate them. There are a lot of people struggling because rents have gotten so high that they can't afford money for food or for clothing, for other things. So it seems like people's safety nets are kind of dwindling away over the last, 10, 15, 20 years to an extent that I don't think I ever saw before in my lifetime.
Right. I'm 39 and I'm seeing it and I'm feeling it. And, long term, big picture, even as a country, I know we're talking about Ledyard here, but as a country, you have to look at what part you play. If we have this social contract and we're supposed to be here for one another and we're supposed to be proud of what we stand for, then eventually we have to understand that these people are just going to get pushed out. And then where do they go? Are we just going to have a country divided between the haves and the have-nots? And when you look at that long history of generational wealth and how that has been built, we have to acknowledge that some people have absolutely been denied, officially and unofficially, to even have the opportunity to
and maybe
do
even
those
ripped
things.
off at times when
That's
they
exactly
did,
what
right?
I mean.
Yeah.
Banks being denied loans or astronomical interest rates, or your house being undervalued because you can tell that black people live there. That's a real thing. So again, I try to bring it back to Ledyard because I think maybe, starting a few years ago, there was a lot of questions about what does this have to do with Ledyard. Every town in America has something to do with this, whether we feel personally responsible for it or not. I feel like our responsibility is step one, accepting what the issue is, and then working on a plan to remedy it. If we're going to say that we are proud and strong Americans who have each other's backs, then we really have to act like that. We have to be those people. We have to be the change that we want to see. And I'm a military spouse. I'm a military mom now. My son decided to join the Army and he's stationed in Italy. And I know maybe it's perplexing to people sometimes when I talk about these things, but history is history, right? And it's often told through the eyes of the victor. However, that doesn't mean that things have happened that have not. And so as a military spouse, I acknowledge that we have a strong military. And in my mind, that's more about protecting us from other countries. But what do we do inside the country to protect each other? It's not going to be the military. It has to be us.
Yeah, and a lot of the things that threaten us, the military doesn't really address. I spoke to one candidate at one point who said, if you look at the things that have really threatened the lives, external things that have threatened the lives of Americans, a lot of it is like climate change related, the hurricanes, the storms, the heat. They're really what's killing people. We're pretty, I would think it would be very daunting for another country to physically attack us militarily.
Right, and we know this, and I respect service members, obviously. But as a military spouse and a military mom, I find it very insulting when they are used to fire up people over issues that don't exist. like you said. They're taking care of us in terms of protecting us from other countries. But along with climate change, our issues that we deal with within America, a lot of those issues are homegrown American issues. I live right up the road from those lovely white supremacist signs that were put up on Route 12 between Preston and Ledyard. Racism is still a very real threat to people of color in America, and it happens to be, I think, a distinct and particular threat towards Black people. And that's not freedom. That's not liberty. To feel unsafe still is something that we have to deal with. And I think that's also a Ledyard issue as well.
Now, you had mentioned earlier a little bit about, government not being very responsive. That seems to me like an issue that probably would cross a lot of party lines. Have you found you have some interesting or unusual allies because others are frustrated that government seems so opaque?
Absolutely. I've met a lot of people and I've made a lot of connections, and beyond superficially, I think there are a lot of people that I can call friends that I will admit, I would not have thought that we would be friends, not because I think that they're bad people, but unfortunately, due to racial divides, someone like me is also always, not always, but sometimes worried about how people will perceive me. So part of being safe is keeping a safe distance before I actually know who people are. And, talking to people, young, old, wealthy, people who have lived in Ledyard their entire lives, people who are there because of the sub-base, I find that a lot of people are mostly concerned about the same things. And really, it's just about living comfortably and hopefully being able to thrive instead of just surviving. And I want to be able to bring the most amount of people to the table to work on these issues rather than having someone at the helm who is really focused on amassing lots of real estate. And I will say, as a real estate professional and reading an article that was from years ago saying that, that business is in their veins, I don't understand how someone who understands real estate so well hasn't figured out how to develop Ledyard in a way that really takes the burden off of the people when the people are the ones paying the taxes who pay the people that make the decisions for them.
Yeah, it is tough. Because you're mentioning development, I have no idea what this is about, but when I was trying to find articles about Ledyard in the day, I read something that there's a lot of blasting being done. Is that the case, that there are areas being kind of flattened, either for development or, I don't know. I didn't know what the issue was, but
Right.
I saw maybe a letter to the editor about why are we blasting?
Yeah. I think Ledyard is a community that cares a lot about conservation, and I respect that. And I don't know exactly what the plan might be, but I have heard some talk about, some apartments going up that, maybe luxury apartments. Who owns that land? Anybody is welcome to do their own research, but that's part of the issue. Who are we here for? As far as the blasting, I'm really not sure. Sometimes you just don't know. You ask questions and you don't know. Like I said, you ask where the money goes. I don't know. I'll find out. Did you find out? No, I didn't find out. And beyond not getting answers, sometimes the answers that you do get are just so, for lack of a better word, a non-answer. There was a candidate who ran 2 years ago for town council, and one of their answers to a questionnaire was that Ledyard doesn't need 50 CVS style businesses. And in my mind, I thought, well, thanks for the obvious non-answer, you know, as someone who is so experienced, could you tell us what the answer might be? But again, unfortunately, I feel like that's because some people don't even want to touch the word diversity. You know, Fred Allen himself, I brought, you know, social justice and cultural competency to our community relations committee. And when he was asked about what a protest had been about, he told the members of the Youth and Social Services Board that it was about CRT. So if people in Ledyard think that there aren't national talking points being spread around town in order to make people, again, fear each other so that we won't work together, then that's just not true. And at the end of the day, while the average people are busy being fearful of one another or fighting with one another, trust and believe that there are many, many long-standing family names throughout Ledyard who are really benefiting off of that.
You mentioned youth a couple of times, and I was thinking about what, as mayor, you would like to do both to support our youth out of schools, but also to support the schools.
Well, outside of schools, I will say that there's not much for the kids to do in Ledyard. There really isn't. I live around the corner from a beautiful park, but for years the toddler playscape was just dilapidated and just really unsafe. Recently that was put there. We have the VAT that's closer to Ledyard Center, but not everybody can afford to go there. There's Highland Park that has clearly been just neglected. That could be a beautiful space for families to come and enjoy the lake, and you know, getting outside is good for your health. It's good for your physical health, it's good for your mental health, and when you have parents at home who may be struggling to pay the bills, that impacts a whole family. And then these children go into school and they have issues. And do we have the adequate staff to serve them? And although they might need that staff to serve them, really, I would love to see a move away from charity, right? Because if we don't solve the real issues at the core, we'll always have opportunities to give and say, oh, look, you know, we're such a charitable community. I would love for people not to have such a great need. And I would love for the youth in this community to really work with the bodies throughout town that govern us. I think there should be more mentorship or apprenticeships between the youth in our town and Board of Education and Town Council and the Mayor's office. I slightly hesitate to talk about it because children are a sensitive thing, and that people, and I don't want to talk about people's children, right? But the mayor himself had chosen a youth to serve on the Youth and Social Services Board, who he claimed to had already been his own youth mentee, and clearly already had a head start over many people. And when that youth could no longer serve, the mayor then chose his sibling. Whereas the mayor has said in terms of social services, part of the reason why people were denied is because he didn't want people cherry picking and double dipping. And when I heard that, it really hit me in my core because, like I said, I grew up poor. I've seen my parents have to hustle and make a lot out of a little bit. So I posed that question to him as well as the town council. How many of you have ever had to cherry pick or double dip in order to survive? And I believe that connects back to the youth because that's where they're coming from. They are coming from the families. And up into a certain point, you don't really have a lot of control over what is happening in your life. You're depending on the people who are responsible for you to make a way, but sometimes they don't always have a way. So I think if we have more opportunities for the youth to engage with the adults in the community, then maybe that might inspire something in them that they never knew they were interested in or they were even good at. But in a situation where you're just going to keep cherry picking and double picking from your own pool of people, then you're really not here for the entire youth population of Ledyard. We don't have something like a community center. I think that would really serve a large population in our community. After school programs, and I know this may take, volunteer work. I know volunteers don't get paid. My son was fortunate enough to do an after-school program where he knew so many numbers of pi, and I was just like 3.14. That's it. And we need spaces for our children to be creative. I think creativity is such an important piece, and we have strayed away from that because there's no time. Who has time to be creative when you're struggling to put food on the table?
Yeah, there's a real loss of potential talent out there. Mm-hmm. Since you decided to run for mayor, what kind of support have you gotten?
Well, I have my circle, of friends and people, obviously, my family, my children. Talking about the youth, one of my sons is here with me today. They've been to countless meetings. I was just on a meeting the other night that had nothing to do with town government, and my daughter said, "Was it a BOE meeting?" But, I think there is a need. I think people want to see someone at least try and bring the issues out so we can discuss them and we can really weed through why people are making the decisions that they're making. I've already had a lot of people reach out to me and offer me their support and ask what they can do. And really at this point it's about spreading the word, Nicole Cruz-Glacken is a write-in candidate. That's a mouthful.
Yeah, it's not an easy path you've chosen, but we've looked at the numbers in New London in our mayoral races. We've had 3 mayoral races since we changed to that form of government in 2011, 2015, and 2019, and the more candidates there are in that race, the voter turnout shifts really a tremendous amount. One year we had 6 candidates running, the Democrat, the Republican, 3 petitioners, and 1 very serious write-in who had been the endorsed Democrat who lost the primary. And our turnout was something like 4,700, 4,800, but typically if we only have the Republican and Democratic candidate, we get fewer than 3,500 voters.
Right.
So it's clear that a lot of people don't turn out if they don't feel as though their own viewpoint or a perspective that kind of takes them into consideration. If no one with that different viewpoint is running, they're not going to care about voting.
Right, and that's a big piece for me as well. I've heard, what are my odds and what are my chances? I know what they are, but again, to be of service isn't just about yourself. Being of service and being a leader is about serving. Sometimes I think a lot of people want to wear the crown, but the crown gets heavy. So if your neck isn't strong enough, be careful what you wish for. I would really like to see a greater voter turnout in Ledyard. I think complacency is a huge issue. And I was just looking, I think we shared that a little bit, the last mayoral election, I think the sitting mayor got something like 2,200 votes. And if you look at the rest of the candidates for town council and board of education, nobody else gets 2,200 votes. So, right, you get all the votes because you're really the only option.
Yeah.
So if it brings people to the polls, if it helps people, if it gives people a reason to pay attention, that's really what I want. It's the win for me has already been the journey. And so that doesn't make me a candidate that's not serious. Otherwise, I wouldn't be here today. I'm going to take this as seriously as I can. My family is very much a part of this and active participants and supporters. But I really want the people of Ledyard to feel fired up. I want them to ask questions. I want them to ask me questions. I want them to ask Fred questions. I want them to talk about things that maybe they never thought anybody cared about, and really be involved civically, because it's going to take all of us if we want Ledyard to, you know, step into this century and not just remain what it is, because I, for one, do not intend to turn Ledyard from this suburban / rural town into a city. You know, that's not it. But if we're going to complain about taxes, if nothing changes, nothing changes.
Now, so you've been talking for a while about why people should support you or vote for you. Let's talk a little bit about how they can vote for you, because it won't be obvious.
Right.
People who meet you who think, oh, like she'd be, you know, great to have there. I really, you know, believe in that platform. And then they look at the ballot and your name isn't going to be there.
Right.
So what can people do who, you know, want to vote for you and to be able to do that, because it's not an easy road for a write-in candidate.
No, it's not at all. And for me, you know, step one, acceptance is a beautiful thing. This is as grassroots as it gets. So in my mind, I'm thinking, if you're listening, if you're watching, if you're even interested, grab a Post-it, grab a piece of paper, and just write my name down. You know, Nicole Cruz-Glacken. I'll be at the polls, you know, on election day, along with friends who would be helping with cards with my name on it, so that they know exactly how it's spelled. I am a write-in candidate, so they will have to write my name on the ballot.
Yeah.
However, this year, Fred Allen is not the only choice. So I just really want people to hopefully spread the word. You know, if one person tells another person and that person tells somebody else, that's really what this is about, because I don't have the resources. I don't have the money. I don't have a political party backing. I don't have a name that is already well known in the town. I'm not already the sitting mayor. So I think if there was going to be a specific ask of me right now for the people of Ledyard, is just to really spread the word. If you want your voice to be heard and you also want to send a message, even if I don't win, if you want to send a message, make sure you go November 7th and you vote and you write my name on that box for the write-in candidate, Nicole Cruz-Glacken.
And if they forget your name, although write-in candidates' names are no longer posted at the polls, they used to be, but they're not anymore. If you're not sure of the name, you can ask a poll worker for the list of registered write-in voters.
Absolutely.
And find the name and the spelling. In spite of what you were told, I think if people just wrote Nicole CG, I don't see how it could not be credited to you.
Right.
But, you know, and make it clear and fill in the bubble. It's not easy, because even people who love you, if they can't figure out how to write, you know, how to vote for you, well, that's how it might be for a lot of people.
Right, and I'm still working on those things to be resources for the voters in Ledyard, because they deserve that. If I'm going to call myself a serious candidate, then I have to do this like anybody else would. And given the limited amount of time and resources, I plan on, you know, documenting this journey and letting them know what's going on, and working on literature to show them and have it there on election day. And, you know, I want people to feel comfortable asking questions. Because again, with the fear factor, sometimes people don't ask questions because they are afraid. And sometimes we forget that the people who volunteer to serve, even on election day, are there to serve you. Go in there, even if you're afraid you're gonna forget my name, no worries. Walk into there on November 7th and ask someone who is the write-in candidate for mayor. And you should expect them to give it to you. So it's just that easy, even if that's what it comes down to. I'll be out there with signs and cards, but you should be able to ask your poll workers who the write-in candidate is and get accurate information. And that's another standard, you know, of accountability that we need to really buckle down on in Ledyard.
Now, in the last 2 minutes you have, how can people learn more about you or get in touch with you if they want to get involved with your campaign?
Well, right now I have a Facebook page. I know that still is a limited group of people, but it's Nicole Cruz-Glacken for Mayor of Ledyard. Or you can just look up my name without the mayor, Nicole Cruz-Glacken. I have a personal page, and I don't mind speaking to people, you know, via that way. Or email. This is another long one, but it's yeah, it's Miss MS Phoenix PHOENIX Cruz CRUZ@gmail.com.
Well, when we post this, we'll put the link, the email address in the comments part.
Okay, right.
So yeah.
Or if you see me, see me out and about, don't be intimidated. You know, we may have different political views or whatever it may be, but I'm really not as scary as people have tried to make me seem. I promise you.
Well, thank you so much for coming down to New London to talk to us today. And
thank you.
We will air the show here and also on the Groton side of the river. So hopefully your local, you know, fellow Ledyard residents will be able to see it.
I hope so.
Good luck with your campaign.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
And I think next week we'll be going back to having New London candidates as the, you know, time is ticking towards Election Day 5 weeks from today. So whatever you do, vote.
Yes, absolutely. November 7th, vote.
Thanks, Nicole.
Thank you.
When the rain don't